Hello, and thank you for joining our webinar today. For those of you who aren't familiar, I'd like to introduce Lux Research. And at the core, our mission is to help our clients drive growth through tech innovation. And we do this with a combination of technical expertise mixed with business acumen, primary research where we're on the ground talking to companies and innovators, as well as advanced data and analytics to help pull together the important data points that help us make the right decisions. A little bit more detail about what Lux does and how they actually drive strategic decisions around technology. There's a number of different functions we serve. We do things like market landscaping, in-depth analysis of technology and specifically startup companies that are developing that technology. We do opportunity assessment to help you understand where to enter and how to enter. We help you identify risks. We look at the value chain and figure out your entry point and partnerships. And ultimately, we're an unbiased third-party perspective that you can trust to really help make strategic decisions. Today, we'll be talking about highlights from the Lux Executive Summit, which took place here in Boston a few weeks back. My name is Kevin C. I'm the Vice President of Digital Products, where I'm responsible for developing the technologies that our clients use and interact with, as well as directly advising them on their technology and innovation strategy. And with me is my colleague Ari, who will introduce himself.
Hi everyone, this is Arij van Berkel. I'm joining you from our Amsterdam office. I oversee our energy program and our energy team, and I also am part of the team that's thinking about the future of innovation within Lux and how to better support our clients taking innovation decisions.
Thanks, Ari. So, for those of you who have been on Lux Research webinars before, today's a slightly different format because we wanted to try and encompass really 2 days of presentations and conversations into a concise bucket of 45 minutes. So what we're going to do is a little bit more conversational than usual. We will have slides in as backdrop when we're making certain points that connect to the overall theme of the event. As usual, you can always ask questions. So use the question box on your screen and not the chat box. And we welcome as many questions as we can get in, and we'll do our best to get through them. And with that, let's get started. So again, we're going to talk about highlights from the Lux Executive Summit. And the theme here was about evolving your innovation process. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, and Ari will actually explain some of the data that explains why there should be more urgency behind this. Just a tiny bit on the event itself. We had over 200 attendees from over 115 organizations. We had a startup showcase this year, which we curated and handpicked 20 startups that we thought were particularly impactful and that we rated highly. And so each of them had a booth, and they were able to interact with all the clients that came through. So it was a really dynamic and a really fun event, and we hope to see you there next year. But in terms of the driving force for why this theme of evolving innovation, well, this number really encompasses the reasoning behind that. And so 12.5% is the percentage of product development projects that ultimately turn into profitable products. And this is a study done by the Professional Product Development and Management Association. And so when we work with our clients, all the technologies we study, the companies, the business models, the strategies, all point towards doing better than this. So we wanted to devote a large portion of the event to really attacking how do we improve these results? How do we become more efficient, but also be more successful? And so I'm going to let Ari explain that this isn't just anecdotal. This is really driven by data. So Ari, can you explain some of what you uncovered when you were looking into this?
Yeah, so this 12.5% is fascinating, right? 1 in 8. And is that good or isn't it? And that's really hard to tell. I've personally been involved in innovation management since about 2000, which is an interesting time when open innovation started to become really popular and important. Just really popular and important. And also, if you look at the slide here, you can see that that's about when, and we're looking at data from Volkswagen here. That's about when really the talk about innovation started picking up. Right? What I was doing at the time was I was changing the way we programmed innovation from R&D driven, from really just figuring out what R&D departments to fund, to program driven, figuring out what goals to achieve in programs. And what Volkswagen was doing there around that time was speaking about innovation, and that's the gray line there. That's how many times they mention innovation in their annual report, which was going up from about maybe 10 times to well over 200 times in 2015 and 2016. So the really innovation gained a lot of importance since the turn of the century. And you can see it money-wise as well, right? If you look at the yellow and the purple lines here, that's capital intensity and R&D intensity. And really R&D intensity wasn't even measured in the 1970s, and it became a line item in the annual reports around the 1980s. And it maybe started out around 2%, grew to about 3%, and now it's about 6%. So 6% of revenues spent on R&D, not even on innovation. Innovation spending is probably a bit more. And capital intensity, the amount of money spent on new capital investments, actually decreased in that same time due to outsourcing, due to much more strategic managing of the value chain. So where we are now, capital intensity and R&D intensity are similar. And if I were a shareholder of, in this case, Volkswagen, I would really scrutinize that spending in very similar ways. So innovation spending is now scrutinized in much the same way as capital spending is. But can you stand up to that scrutiny? Do you have the kind of metrics that are applicable to, say, building a new car factory? Can you apply those kind of metrics? Can you justify the amount of money spent on this in much the same way as you can justify the amount of money spent on your capital expenditure? And that was really one of the key themes of LES, right? How do you do that? How do you justify those decisions? If you go to the next slide, you can see that I was talking about Volkswagen here, but really the automotive industry is really in the middle, right? This applies to every industry. What you can see here is that R&D spending is growing faster than revenue in all of these industries, with the exception of pharmaceuticals. So it means that every industry, the R&D intensity is increasing, except pharmaceuticals. And it also means that the scrutiny applied to those to the money spent there is also getting tighter and more important. So that was one of the things we discussed, Kevin, in this conference, and it was throughout the conference really about how to take decisions in those circumstances.
Right. So if the anecdotal evidence we have from clients says there's urgency, the data itself says there's urgency, talk a bit about the framework that you put in place to, again, the theme here was evolving, right? Evolution. Can you talk about how we transition, and if we're transitioning from what today to what tomorrow?
Yeah, so we talked a lot about this in the conference, right? So just a few highlights, which is also the title of this webinar. Everyone has been working on this, right? I'm not saying anything new. And there have been a lot of tools already developed for innovation management, which is actually starting in around 2000 until now. All of those tools have appeared. But are you using them in the right way? And many of the clients we spoke to, even at the conference, even at LES, agree that they are not too happy about how they're using those tools. The tools themselves are okay, the theories are sound, but how are you using them? If you look at the next slide, for example, we basically postulated, we said, well, there's two things that are right now preventing you from using those tools. One is you lack data. A lot of these decisions are still taken on expert opinion, basically on opinion. And there's nothing wrong with opinion, but it would be even better if you also have the data behind it. And then you lack integration. So if you have a roadmap, that's fine, but does your roadmap change? If your roadmap changes, does it also affect the criteria you apply to your stage gating in the innovation funnel? And many times that's not the case, or it's really hard work to do that. So we say most people now are in innovation management 1.0, which is slow. It's good. It's a good way of managing innovation, but it's slow, it's painful, it's not enabled by data. It takes a lot of work to do it properly. And a lot of people do not do it properly because it's just too much work and you don't have the automation and the instant feedback. And where you want to be is innovation management 2.0, where you still apply the same theories, but the feedback is instantaneous. You get direct responses to questions. You can act more or less real time on challenges that occur. And you can take decisions based on actual data, not yesterday's data or last year's data, but on today's data, and actually improve your projects on the fly. And that's really what we talked about generically. And then we went into many sessions where we looked at how to do that more specifically and in detail. Just to share you one last thing on the next slide, you can see how our products and many other products fit into this framework. So you can see our original member site there, but you can also see our Lux Tech Signal and our Lux 299, for example, and we'll talk more about that a bit later. So that set up the scene, and then after that, of course, someone like yourself, Kevin, elaborated more on that. For example, on how to apply this and how to apply data, how to get more data driven at the fuzzy front end of the funnel.
Yeah, so that's a lot of what we'll talk about in terms of highlights going forward is showing how we envision companies moving from really the bottom left to the upper right, which is what everybody wants. So briefly, I think it would be helpful. People want to, everybody wants to be in the upper right. Can you briefly explain or show us a 1.0 example? And then I think we'll start entering that conversation of how we can all get more towards 2.0.
Right. So if you want to picture the difference between 1.0 and 2.0, I think a good example of really a best-in-class example of how to do innovation management 1.0 is what Nourion, formerly AkzoNobel, has been doing with Imagine Chemistry, where they formulate challenges, they then post those challenges in a specifically developed platform where people can drop their ideas. Those ideas are then interactive, so specialists from Nourion and other specialists can pose questions and get answers, and so the ideas are refined. And then based on those refined ideas, which were again based on the challenges, some of them, so they collect about 200 ideas, and then they invite maybe 15 of them to an event. And the event is really about processing those ideas into proposals as to how Nourion could do a project based on those ideas. So that's really a good process. But if you look at the numbers, they spend about a year running the entire process. It takes a full year to run through the entire cycle. They spend about 2 or 3 people working on it, more or less full time. They get about 200 ideas, and still they don't know if they get the 200 best ones. They get the 200 that they get. They bring it down to about 15 ideas that they look at in detail, and then they end up with maybe 2 or 3 projects. So it's a year of hard work with a very good and thorough process, but the efficiency is very low, and it's a lot of work to do it, and it takes a year. You're not very fast at this thing. And Innovation Management 2.0 really is about closing that loop faster, making all of this real time without a lot of the manpower behind it, really enabled by automated processing and still enabled by people, but the people have a much easier job of doing that.
Great, and I think if that's 1.0, I think you worked on that particular Nourion example Are people happy with the results, the efficiency? And again, how did that kind of point you towards this idea of having to do better, essentially?
I think people are happy with the results, and at the same time, that's why they want to improve. So it's a good process. The results are good, but why do we have so little of it? Because it's too expensive to have more of it, of course. So the real issue is how to get better at collecting those ideas and to basically go quicker and generate more good ideas that you can immediately act on, rather than having to spend 1 year just to get 2 or 3 projects going. That really is the issue, and that really is about getting more automation and more integration into the process, where if an idea pops up in your platform, the interaction, the whole reflection on the idea is more or less instantaneous, and you can get it ranked against other ideas also more or less instantaneous, and then you can immediately start working on how to apply this specifically to your company, in this case Nourion, and how to really start a project next day and not wait for the event to happen, for example. Right? How can you recreate that magic of that event continuously?
Got it. I think the next thing that I wanted to attack was putting into practice your vision of Innovation 2.0, Innovation Management 2.0, with real examples. So we could say naively, like, let's just add data, automate across this whole process. Instead, the approach we took at the conference was really to dive into different aspects of the process. And so in my talk, actually, we focused on the very front end of the funnel. You talked about getting more ideas, better ideas. And so that was the main focus here for me. So how is this done today? How do people get ideas into the funnel? Ari, I'm sure you've seen this. It's a very manual process. There's a lot of spreadsheets. There are some tools for managing the pipeline, but it's things like SharePoint, which are a mess. And there's really, ultimately, a lot of people are frustrated with how systematically they can actually manage their ideas.
Yeah, so that really is a laborious process, right? And that's part of the issue. So that takes a lot of time, and mistakes happen. It's just silly having people copy stuff between Excel sheets all the time.
Exactly. So what we did, and Ari alluded to this with the Lux 299, and what I wanted to emphasize was that these are fun lists for you to post online and debate which technology is more interesting or hotter than the next. But we actually use this as a management tool where there's essentially a democracy where everyone on our team can submit technologies that can be evaluated against the same metric. In this case, we use the Lux Tech Signal, which, if anybody's interested or hasn't seen it, we're happy to talk at length about. But it's a data-driven, it uses patents, publications, funding, and more to actually rank technologies. So the ones that the clients see, there's about 299. Behind the scenes, there's more like 3,000. And we're constantly adding this, and anyone can add to this database as long as they can define the technology. So it becomes a central repository where you can track all the technologies you're interested in, have them ranked and sorted against each other, and that helps you stay organized, that helps you ensure you don't miss anything, and it helps you actually get data to understand which ones have momentum. So we think that this is towards that vision of Innovation 2.0.
Right, and what's really attractive here is that, and looking at Innovation 2.0, is that monitoring those technologies now is practically free, right? You put a search string in the system, and the system monitors for you, and it bubbles up to the top whenever it needs to. Now, of course, you may wonder, do I want to rely entirely on a quote-unquote system? But still, this is a huge improvement, because now you can monitor as much as you like, and this algorithm will highlight what you need to really pay attention to and what you can just leave on the back burner. But it's still there. And that's what I mean by doing things instantaneously.
Right, and we found it's powerful. So we actually filtered this data more strongly to actually look for what we called weak signals, which was things with a fast growth trajectory but are perhaps less magnitude, so it's more buried underneath the noise. And so, examples of things that got pulled out were battery recycling, transfer learning, the skin microbiome. Again, you can enter technologies at whatever granular level you want to. But I think the important point that I wanted to emphasize is that we are certainly not advocating for a data-only approach. At some point, you need people on the front end to put in strong technologies and define them well. And on the back end, you need people to do something effectively and take action on those technologies. So the example that I wanted to highlight was research that was led by my colleague Tim Graytag. And I mentioned that one of the weak signals that the data popped out was battery recycling. So what he did is take the fact that, yes, the data tells us this is important, but then he runs with it and actually analyzes where the opportunity is in the value chain, what are the different technologies, what is the value to the market for doing these different approaches. And so in any business, again, we're talking about that front end, unless you think data will displace the human aspect. Again, what we're really advocating for is that you still need humans on the front end. You still need humans to run with it, but the data can help you identify and act faster and honestly and efficiently and with more confidence.
Right. So this was how our colleague Katrina was explaining in her session at LES how digital technology enhances humans, not replaces, but enhances human performance. And this is a very good example of that, of course.
So the other aspect is that people have the talk around machine learning and AI has been extremely hot within our client base. But the main point of skepticism really is anybody using it? And if they are they using it effectively? And what we wanted to dig into further in this conference was to take that head on and actually look at what are the approaches and tool sets within machine learning that are actually useful today. And within our team, we have our own data science team, and we've identified natural language processing as that tool that today in innovation can have an impact right now and actually can move the needle. So there's a lot of methodology, there's a lot of detail behind how to do this, but we took an example like 2D materials, which is a general topic, and we actually use machine learning to uncover what within 2D materials is worth spending time on. So there's a deep methodology. It's really about breaking a set of documents into topics. This would take an hour just to start discussing this slide on its own, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but we're happy to elaborate with anyone who wants to chat further. But the key points that I made and that I'd like to emphasize for clients is that machine learning is not just hype, it's not just a toy, it's not just a buzzword. It is something that can help you segment, identify trends and key players. In the best case, at a push of a button, it can remove bias from the process and give you tremendous insight versus today's process where you count on smart people to maintain a pipeline, you do very thorough landscaping, it takes a long time, you have bias, and you just don't get to put as many good ideas in and you don't get to evaluate them quickly. So we did this for 2D materials, and what we found was that there's a number of topics that popped out. Again, this is not us telling the model what to do, it's the model telling us what's important. And a number of different topics fell out. And to give you an idea of the type of quick landscaping you can do from a single model is you've got key terms associated with the topic, you've got key players in the bottom left, you've got patent trends over time. So it's really a tremendous way to take an undefined or uncertain topic and really get towards more actionable insight so that you can take this and run with it.
Right. So you took a bigger theme, if you like 2D materials. You had artificial intelligence identify topics. Then you showed a number of topics, but there were gaps, right? You had like topic 7 and topic 10, but not topic 8 in there. So our analysts selected some of the topics and also discarded some of them as, well, okay, it came out of the algorithm, but it's probably not as useful. And now you can take a deep dive instantly and you can look at what's behind the topics, who's working on it, what patterns are there. So again, it's the instantaneousness of the entire analysis, right? This is all in one go. Maybe not in 1 minute, but at least within the same week.
That's definitely right. And I think to your point that you added, and this goes back to the human element, some of the topics don't make sense, or some of the topics, if you're looking at patents, might be German. The topic is German, and that's not exactly a relevant, actionable topic. So you do need people to interpret and understand, again, on both ends of the process, but you still, we would argue, get a better answer by using this type of technology and to augment your process rather than relying on really a brute force approach.
Right. So this is all very much still technology driven, right? But there's other things as well. There's things like megatrends. There's developments in the markets that you also need to watch. You cannot be satisfied by just looking at technology. You also have to watch societal developments and all of those kind of things. And we also talked about that in the conference. So what stood out to you, Kevin, about that discussion, about that other side of where innovation is coming from?
Yeah, the topic of megatrends has been a hot one. I mean, we talked about it at LES probably 5 years ago, but it still persists because, frankly, people don't take a very systematic approach to using or interpreting megatrends. So my colleague Cosmin Laszlo actually took a more data-driven approach to understand how do I measure which megatrends are hot, and then ultimately how do I act on those megatrends in a systematic way. So we see a lot of annual report fodder and discussion around megatrends. Our approach for this conference was, again, to attack a different part of that innovation process, move it towards innovation management 3.0. And so what Cosmin did was he actually looked at an analysis of different third-party voices in the market, consultants, professional services, other firms, and what they're saying the key megatrends are. And we really took a pretty straightforward approach and said, let's measure which megatrends are occurring most often in these reports and identified. So you can actually look at this data and see that if you were to poll across all of these, ostensibly thought leaders in the market, what's bubbling to the top? And so we normalized this so we could look at an average popularity across this. And we found that globalization and inequality and demographic shifts bubble to the top, followed by some of the usual suspects you might predict, like climate and sustainability, AI, workforce automation, and so on. So there is a lot of kind of uniformity, ultimately, in that the same ideas kept popping up and persisting in the conversation. But what he also did, the other data set we have is actually you, the clients, some of whom are on the phone. So we actually combed through our key initiatives, the conversations we have with you, the notes we understand about you. We anonymized it to make sure nothing got revealed about who is interested in what. But you see that the prioritization changes to some extent in that climate and sustainability, AI, and workforce automation actually bubbled to the top above things like globalization and inequality and demographic shifts. So it's interesting to see the contrast between what some of the voices in the market are saying versus what some of the companies we're actually working with are doing.
Right, and now So this is great because now you have a data-driven, at least a comparison of what everyone's thinking that the main megatrends ought to be. But if I'm thinking about the instantaneous response, right? You want to go deeper. You want to be able to look at a megatrend and get actionable things. Because if you just say to me climate and sustainability or workforce automation, I still don't know what to do in my innovation process. So what's the next level? That is a really exciting part, I think.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Cosmin did is, again, how do you systematically take action on these ideas and attack them in a way that makes sense? And so what he did was actually, you see that climate and sustainability is the one that got kind of a thumbs up or got a check mark across all the groups we looked at. The one I didn't talk about that you can see in the slides later is the shareholder perspective, which also identified climate and sustainability. So this is a favorite topic across our client base. We've been talking about it for years. It will continue to be for a long time. But in terms of building a strategy around it and taking action and monitoring, what can you do? And one of the main questions is, where do you start? And where you normally start with a big idea like this is by defining it. And one of the handiest ways to define something is using a taxonomy. So we took sustainability. Cosmin looked at things like you could build a tree that looks at materials. You could look at transportation and mobility. You could look at other technologies like certain flavors of batteries. You could build a long laundry list of things that fit under the umbrella of sustainability. The problem is, now what? Where in your playbook is which one is most important to me? Which one's best aligned for me? Which one is most urgent? Again, this goes back to the point I made when we're talking about machine learning, and that it's manual, it's time consuming, you miss stuff. So we want to do better than that ultimately.
Right. And so this normally you would normally make a long laundry list, and then you would say, well, that's too long. I'll just pick a few and ignore the others because I cannot possibly process all of them. Right? That's the normal way of things.
Exactly, and that's where you get the situation where you might miss stuff. And that's what everyone fears. You always want to make the right bets. And you want to make sure you're not the one who missed the next big thing, right? I think that's a fear that all our clients have. And so that's the thrust of this, right? If I sum up early, is that the data can help you get more confidence as you make these decisions. And it doesn't have to be exactly what we show, but incorporating data into your process is definitely a powerful way to improve your process. And so what we did is actually take that radar visualization, and I want to spend a little bit more time explaining the interesting parts of this graph. Is that the closer you are to the center of this radar is actually data-driven, looking at that tech signal, which actually tells you there's a lot of patenting, there's a lot of publications, there's a lot of investment. So it being closer is not us putting our finger to the air, it's actually letting the data tell us what's most urgent. So you can take that taxonomy you built, you can bucket the technologies, you can look at how they stack up against each other and which ones are approaching quickly. So again, it's a step past, I build a taxonomy and then I run off in a bunch of different directions. It's helped me figure out a way to prioritize where I'm going to go next.
Right, so now you have the data aiding you in you still can't possibly process everything on the list, but at least the data is telling you which ones you need to attend to immediately and which ones you can deal with later or not at all. So really that's how you can even get data behind megatrends. Of course, and you can click on this and zoom in and find more, like we showed before, right? And find more ways of starting with this and finding partners and all that. But that's not all of it. We also talked about other things here, really about, because we now have talked about technology, we've talked about societal trends driving innovation, and then there's the other big item that's driving innovation, which is how you do business, your business model. And again, there you can also become more data driven, right? So that's another example we discussed at LES. How do you do business model innovation in a more integrated and more data driven fashion? And I think our colleague Sriram gave a presentation about that. And I know you were intimately involved in developing that thinking, Kevin. So can you take us through that thinking in the next couple of minutes?
Absolutely. And what we found, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of our clients that work with us in the digital space. And sometimes they're interested in a particular technology or widget or a piece of software. Increasingly, they're interested in how to monetize data, how to use connectivity to drive new services in their products. So there's a lot of, not necessarily uncertainty about the technology, but the business model that it enables. And what we've found, frankly speaking, is that people are not super sophisticated here. If you're in a business which is used to making a widget, and I don't mean that disparagingly, a lot of widgets make a lot of money. You sell a lot of a certain product, it's discrete manufacturing. The idea of what to do when you connect that, start generating data, how you actually create new monetization pathways, that's hard work. That's not easy to do in the construct of how many of these companies do their innovation. So what Sriram did is first show you that there's a lot of great technical developments over time. The companies we work with, the companies in the market, are incredible technology innovators. I'm not going to, he spent a lot more time on all these case studies, but BASF had an outperforming herbicide. Pfizer was developing inhalable insulin. Michelin promised the next revolution in run flat tires. Common thread, all great technologies, all extremely innovative, used the best tools, had extremely strong research, R&D and development teams. Common thread is they all failed ultimately, or at least certainly didn't live up to expectations or failed in some manner. I'll spoil it and say that the BASF one has a happy ending because, surprise, they innovated their business model. However, the other two actually just flamed out and really disappeared. And so I want to get your perspective on this, Ari, in a second. I want to show first, Sriram did the exercise of defining business models, and so it's really thinking about what makes a company. And much of this may seem basic. This is not meant to be pedantic, but it's meant actually to level set how we think about business models. Because the other thing we've noticed when we talk to clients is that they all define business model differently. Some only care about the service and monetization. Some care a lot about this whole chain of capabilities, resources, and processes. And so what Sriram wanted to level set was based on the literature he looked at and based on how we've seen this space evolve. The business model is really about core value addition, which encompasses these four items: capabilities, resources, processes, and products and services. And we started there in terms of analyzing where a product development pathway may have been missing parts of this framework. And so, Ari, I wanted to pose to you, because you have experience with, I think, things like the business model canvas and other things. You know, how do you view a simplified version of this in context of some of the complex business model analyses you've seen?
Yeah, so it's probably within Lux, it's not a big secret, I think, that I'm not a fan of the business model canvas. I think it's a great checklist, but it's way too confusing and too complicated to strategize. So I really liked it when I saw Sriram show this, because this is precisely the level you need to make sense of your of how you implement your business. Right? There's another framework I really like, which is complementary, I think, to this, which is about value creation, value capture, and value generation. And you could say value creation is a lot about the technology. If you can do new things, you can generate new value because you can do something that you couldn't do before. And value capture really is about megatrends and about what's happening in the market. So now you created value, but how do you retain part of it? How do you make it come to you? And then value generation really is about this, because even if you know how to how to make the value and how to capture it, you still need to generate it. You still need to put everything in place to make sure that the value is actually there. And this is a great model to make sense of that. So the whole list of technology, megatrends, and business model, or value creation, capture, and generation, I think is a really powerful tool to break down innovation and make sure you pay attention to all of the important aspects. And then, of course, if you look at what the thinking behind, right, you can see how you need to think about where you apply this thinking. Where do you, so if you follow my drift and you say, well, there's creation, there's capture, and there's generation, you might think that you want to do the generation at the very end, right? Somewhere in stage 5 or 6 of your funnel. And that is what Sriram pointed out, and what I think was eye-opening to me at least, is wrong. You need to do this very early. You need to do it in an integrated approach from the very start. So don't do your value generation late in the process. Actually do it as early as you possibly can. Even though that's difficult, because you need to know what you want to generate before you can think about generating, right? A lot of these questions, like what are the capabilities and resources, are hard to answer at the fuzzy front end, but you still need to do it. And that's again where data and automation can really help you be better at that process, I think. Yeah, so that's, I hope that gives you an idea, Kevin, about my thinking there.
Yeah, that's great, Ari. And I think I do want to wrap up, and I think we only have time for maybe one question at this point. I wanted to make the point that we are just giving you a flavor and some context for all the conversations we had over time. You can find all the presentations that Lux produced and many of the outside speakers at the link here, so you all have access to this. I highly recommend you listen in depth, because there's a lot more insight that gets dug into across those presentations. And then videos are in processing now, and they'll be up on YouTube shortly as well. So I think the best question to wrap with, and is one that we got over the course of the webinar, is you outlined this vision of 1.0 to 2.0. Where are most companies today? If you could pinpoint who might be furthest along this path, how far into the vision of 2.0 are companies really today? Are they're pretty far? Are they just aspiring, or are there some real leaders in that way?
Right, that's an interesting question, and I talked to many companies during LES about this. Some of whom were sharing where they thought they are. Some were asking, how do I figure out where I am? And actually, we extended an invitation to everyone, and also to everyone now on the call, to come talk to us. Let us interview you. Let us collectively figure out where you are. But if you ask me to give a quick opinion on where I think most companies, where on average everyone is, a lot of people are now working with, along the integration axis, right? So the horizontal axis of that framework, really playing with tools to integrate all of their various bits of information they have about their innovation process. So I would like to call that innovation resource management. You're implementing tools very similar to enterprise resource management, where you're just gathering all of the data in one place and making sure at least that's consistent, and you have access, whatever you're doing, to the same kind and the same amount of data. And you prevent people from copying Excel sheets from one into the other. So I think that's where most people are. And then there's another group of companies that are really focusing on R&D automation, on doing multiple well plate analysis or doing fast screening of catalysts, really automating R&D tasks and making sure that that produces much more data in a much quicker way. So that's the two axes that companies are working on, and they're reasonably advanced in both axes, but those haven't come together. So really, everyone's laying the groundwork now, and the next 3 years or something are going to be really exciting when people are bringing those together into one coherent system.
Great. So with that, we're going to wrap up the webinar for today. We know there's more questions. If you want to talk to us more in depth about this, reach out to your normal client engagement manager, email us at questions@luxresearchinc.com. Again, I encourage you to look at the slides where you can, because we had sessions that also dug into specific technologies and industries like oil and gas, APAC innovation, digital transformation, and so on. So a lot of rich content, a lot of great conversations that we expect to have following from this. So with that, thank you all for joining today. We look forward to seeing you on the next Lux Research webinar.